Get social with us. Follow us on Instagram at Goodtaste TV. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Good Taste for the Soul. I'm Tanji, Patton. We're going to be talking about miracles today. That will definitely put you in a good mood. If you watch our show regularly, you know we believe in miracles. I believe they are all around us. Sometimes we just have to open our eyes and look, right? And maybe even expect, if not pray for them. Well, you're going to meet a man today who you probably already know. Dr. Marc Siegel is seen all over national news. He is the senior medical analyst for Fox News, and he's written a book about miracles. It's called The Miracles Among Us. He talks about some amazing things he's seen in all of his years practicing medicine, as well as the powerful relationship between prayer and healing. It does exist, doesn't it? Well, I hope you enjoyed Dr. Siegel's conversation as much as I did. Welcome to Good Taste for the Soul. It really is a pleasure and an honor to have you on the show. I know a lot of our listeners know who you are and respect your opinion and your medical advice, which we get in a variety of topics routinely on Fox. So it's great to have you here with us. I wanted to talk to you about a variety of things, and everything kind of ties back to your medical knowledge and expertise and your new book, most recently, The Miracles Among Us. And your awesome team sent us some artwork, and I'll definitely put that up. But I enjoyed the book. It's got some incredible stories, and I don't think anybody ever gets tired of hearing about miracles. Do you?
No, but I think that miracles need to be reformatted and redefined in people's minds, because when people think of miracles, they think of the unattainable. They think that somewhere, somehow, something happened where God shows his presence in a completely unfathomable way that's
Mm-hmm.
felt to be impossible, and he makes the impossible possible. Of course, God can do that. But God set up the world, and the world is not entirely on autopilot, but direct divine intervention is not the only kind of miracle that we see. Now, I, the blind man seeing again and the paralyzed man walking again certainly happened, and the clouds from above destroying whole civilizations, and all of that is under God's guidance, and those uh, miracles are in what Jewish people call the Gemara, but there's also what's called softer miracles, and that those give people hope, especially at a time like this. Now, in my book, I have a miracle from Lourdes, the last miracle of Lourdes that actually was called a miracle by the Catholic Church, with Sister Beatrice, who had an extremely damaged spine. And then after visiting Lourdes a few days later, she was able to walk again and use the bathroom without assistance. And that was verified by over 300 physicians, including the physician of Lourdes, who I'm very fond of, because he says, look, I'm a man of great faith, but this is verified in a faith way. And that gave me a really interesting idea, which is you may want to verify church miracles that way, but the better way to look at miracles overall is as an integration of faith and science, where not where you leave your vestments at the door when you go into the operating room, but where more or less you you allow your faith to inform your doctoring. You're comfortable in your own skin as the hands of God. A lot of my book is about great miracles that occur with great doctoring, with modern technology, with the art of medicine, combined with prayer. Sometimes the people don't even believe in God, or they don't believe that it's a miracle, or they don't want to
Right.
call it a miracle. So why would a miracle occur that people don't even want to recognize as a miracle? Because they happen every day, because they happen among us, because they're part of what I call the miracle lane, where a series of coincidences start to accumulate. And my publisher, Lisa, who's phenomenal, would always say to me, what is the predominant miracle in that chapter, as I was writing it and revising it, and they were looking at it. And my response was always, well, you could call it this, but maybe it's that. And I'll give you an example of that. I have a chapter on October 7th, And Lisa believes the miracle in that chapter is the burn cream. And I'm going to explain that to you, and you'll figure out when we get to the burn cream whether the miracle is the burn cream or something else. Um, this poor family was in a kibbutz, and they were in a house with a tiny baby that was 18 months old. And she's a doctor and works at Soroka Medical Center, and she was training to be a critical care anesthesiologist. They're taking over the ICUs now, and they basically are very adept at dealing with ventilators and keeping people alive on ventilators. And Hamas came and burned their house down, and they hid in the safe room. Safe room in their house didn't have a door, so they were barricading the door with a mattress. And Hamas was trying to get in. Hamas was trying to lure them out. Hamas set off a bomb in the house. Eventually, they were able to crawl out through the window of the house, but they were covered with burns, and over 60% of Alay's body was covered with burns. She's the mother, the physician, her husband, Ariel, their daughter, Yael, and she was covered with over 60% of burns. They managed to crawl naked to a tractor and hid over the tractor in a room. The baby would have died or gone into a coma, but the mother breastfed the baby in the midst of all of this. I consider that the miracle,
Wow.
that she breastfed her baby and saved her life. But in going to that tractor, they ended up going through the dirt and they picked up fungal infections. Then they managed to limp their way to the front of the kibbutz where the IDF was waiting, and they another miracle, and they airlifted them to Sheba Medical Center, and she was in a coma for almost 2 months, and she
Wow.
got inhalation burns, burns over all of her body. She got infections. She got, fungal infections. She got COVID. The whole family got COVID. Uh, she ended up with blood clots, and she was looked over in that ICU by what I call an angel named Yael also, the same name as her daughter, who had saved hundreds of patients during COVID, and somehow she survived. And the miracle that the publisher is calling the miracle is Nexobrid, which is
Cream.
something that Israel is now using to treat burns and burn away all the dead tissue and leaving the viable tissue. If you had to do that with a scalpel, you would leave a lot of scars. But
Yeah.
Nexobrid, which is made from pineapples in China, doesn't do that. It's a miracle drug, a miracle treatment. And we're starting to use it now in the United States. So then she had months and months of painful rehab, and eventually, at the end of the chapter, she goes back to work as an anesthesiologist, and they want her at Sheba. She says, I'm going back to where I started. So she resumes her residency at Sirocco. And when I asked her and her husband about their miracle, they said, I don't want this to be known as a miracle because of all of my friends that our friends who didn't make it on October 7th.
Mm, mm. But I like the way you look at it. Clearly, it was a series of miracles. You know, the overriding miracle, they're here, but there was a series along the way that got them there. I wanted to
The
ask you
miracle
too.
lane. They're in a miracle lane of one
Yes,
miracle after another.
that's a good way to look at it. You have an interesting, perspective, I would think. You lost your great-grandparents, in a very violent way early on, and you write in another book of yours that I enjoy reading called The Inner Pulse. You write that at that time, you were shaped you and kind of had an impact on you getting into medicine, right?
Well, because I came to value life with that. It was a blemish on the
Mhm.
history of the family that my great-grandparents were murdered in a pogrom, and my great aunt survived. And one day, when I think it was when I was in college, I I visited her in St. Petersburg, Florida, and she said, "There's something I want you to see." And she took my hand and she put it on her head, and there was a deep gouge in her head from where she'd been clubbed at the age of 9 months by a Cossack in Poland, and
Mm,
I'll never forget that, and it made a deep impact on me. It caused me to value life more and to understand how precious it was. Now, when you're a physician, you absolutely live that every day. We start by working on dead bodies. We start by
yeah,
learning the inevitability of death and the finality of death, and that informs our sense of life and wanting to preserve it. It's why I rarely go to funeral services because I feel I've lost the battle at that point. So I
wow.
I commemorate life, and that's my profession.
Do you think your progression with what went on with your grandparents, you write a lot
Great,
in
great,
both
great
books,
grandparents.
great grandparents. You write a lot in both your books about the spiritual aspects of humans, I guess, and the impact of prayer. Did you start out in the medical profession believing prayer made an impact, or is it something you've come to see and recognize and appreciate more the longer you've been practicing?
That's a really good question. I think both. I think I always knew that prayer played a role, but and I always knew that outcomes were beyond our ability to comprehend or even influence, while at the same time we're constantly trying to influence them. I
Yeah.
understood the paradox of that, in the end the outcome is not in my hand, it's in God's hands. But as I get older and more along in my career, the more comfortable I am with the times when prayer is evoked. There's the great story in my book of Breakthrough, and Breakthrough is a very famous story made famous by Pastor Sam Rodriguez, who I just visited last week, and he interviewed me at the Museum of the Bibles in D.C. We're very good friends. But Pastor Sam produced a movie called Breakthrough, and Breakthrough is based on the story of John Smith, who was 14 years old, and I interviewed him for this book, and he's completely normal. You wouldn't believe it, given what he's been through. He was in Missouri on the ice, and they wanted to impress one of the boy's sisters, and they ended up falling through the ice uh, of Lake St. Louis, and they couldn't find Smith. But the guy trying to rescue him from under the ice heard a voice from the shore that said, "Go 15 feet to the right." He went 15 feet to the right. He got Smith out, but there was no one there. The voice was of a guy who was still in the office. Now, do
Wow.
I believe in that? Yes. Have I
Hmm.
always believed in that kind of thing? Yes. Uh, when I was in medical training, I lost one of my best friends, and one night I woke up and I saw a shirt that I had taken from his possessions to remember him by on a chair, and a radio that had been off suddenly went on and his 3 favorite songs played. Did I think that was a coincidence? No. When John Smith got to the hospital, he had no pulse for almost 55 minutes. The doctors there said they had never seen that before. They wanted to call this code. They wanted to say he was gone, but the mother wouldn't let them say it. And they went along with it because it's one life. It's a precious life. When the mother got there, when John's mother got there, she started to pray. And as soon as she started to pray, his pulse came back. Do I think that's a coincidence?
No.
No, that's divine intervention. And then he wakes up. So it's not just that he came back from 45 to 55 minutes, and it wasn't that cold under the water. So you can't say all of this is hypothermia. It wasn't that cold. But then he woke up and he was himself. How'd that happen? Divine intervention.
Absolutely.
Some of these miracles are not all the same. Some involve more divine intervention like that. Some are God coming to us through dreams. Some are an accumulation of coincidences, like
Yeah.
happened with Aaron's staff in the Bible. I believe in all of that.
Yeah, I do too. And the more I read the Old and New Testament, God's work is clear, and it has been since the beginning of time. Do you pray for your patients?
Yeah, in my own way.
Mhm.
I mean, in my own way. It's not like I go to synagogue and pray for them, but
Right.
they're in my thoughts, and I'm constantly praying for the best possible outcome and recovery. I believe courage matters, hope matters, love matters. My parents are 102 and 100 years old. And
Wow.
my father says he's staying around because of love for my mother, and I believe
Oh,
that is ineffable. I think it's a connector that
yeah.
works. Why do we see that with so many couples that are happily married, that when one dies, the other goes within a year? That's not a coincidence. Nothing is really a coincidence. Everything is tied to a greater reality, and as a physician, if you can recognize that, it only enhances your ability to help people.
Yeah, I totally agree. I wanted to bring up something in your book. You have a book called The Inner Pulse, and this was written some time back, but it's still, I think, really relevant today. And I'll share a little personal side that I really related to this. About 10 years ago, I had meningitis, and or at least they think it was meningitis, and was in the hospital. And I'll never forget, um, hadn't eaten for 3 days. I could feel life force. I don't know what the word is to describe it, but your inner pulse kind of resonated with me. I could feel it slipping away. And I'm a very energetic person. And so I remember one day during all the doctors, they had a team of doctors there trying to figure out what it was, infectious disease and others. And I told the doctor, I said, I'm telling you guys, I know myself, and I know I'm slipping away. And I'll get emotional telling you about it, but it was very personal. And it's a hard feeling to describe, but your book kind of touches on that in your work with these patients, you sense an inner pulse, don't you? There's either a strong will to live or not. There's a spiritual aspect to it. How would you describe it?
Actually, now that you say that, I think of something I've never really put together in my mind, which is that, the inner pulse must have been part of what inspired the miracles among us, because in the inner pulse, I have this story of a man who was a, maitre d' in a restaurant who goes into a coma, and everybody gave up on him, and they're gonna pull the plug, but then he wakes up, and he comes back to the restaurant and works as a waiter. So he's no longer the maitre d', but now he's a waiter. That's his recovery. And I mentioned in the intro to The Miracles Among Us the story of Howard Schwartz. Now, Howard is in both books, but Howard was a patient of mine who uh, had a muscle wasting disease, and he believed he the more weaker he got, the more angry he got, and the angrier he got, it was channeled towards a lawyer who he said had swindled him out of $2 million for work he had done as a paralegal for this lawyer over a decade. And the lawyer just basically owed him money and owed him money, did a handshake agreement, never paid. And eventually, Howard knew he'd never get that money, but he couldn't stop feeling angry the more powerless he got. So he told doctors, and this wasn't me, that he was going to get this guy. He was gonna get him. He was gonna attack him physically. And they thought that Howard was crazy, so they put him in a psych ward. And
Mm.
because how can he do that? He can't do that. He couldn't even move. Well, he got discharged and he went back home. And one day he asked his trusty aide, and this has actually been documented in the newspapers. His aide wheeled him over to the guy's office, and Howard rose out of his wheelchair for the first time in many, many months, overcame this weakness, and pointed a gun
Wow.
at the guy and he said, "Give me my money." And
Wow.
he ended up shooting him, but he only shot him in the foot because he couldn't raise his arms high enough. And the guy went off to the hospital. Howard had chest pain. He went off to the hospital, and they wanted to put Howard in jail, but I wrote an affidavit that he wasn't fit to serve because of his medical condition.
Oh
That's an
my
absolutely
gosh.
true story. And that's in
Wow.
both books. So there's a connector of mind over matter here. I
Yeah.
mean, the issue with the inner pulse is mind over matter, but it's also the issue of the miracles among us, because I think one of the problems in our society is a dissociation between the spiritual and the physical, between the religious and the physical, and I think we have to get back to that. I think our faith can guide us. Cardinal Dolan said to me the other week, and he's very important to my book. He influenced me to believe in something called soft miracles, and I've been describing them here. That soft miracles are a combination of faith plus great doctoring. It's not either or. It's not like, this can't be possible medically, therefore it's a miracle. Well, that's how you get ordained as a saint by the Catholic Church, beautified and then ordained by the Catholic Church. But there are miracles that don't qualify for sainthood
Yeah.
going on every single day. And I believe in them strongly. And the cardinal says great doctoring plus God's wisdom leads to miracles. But he says, and this also resonates with the Old Testament, he says, God brings the miracles to you that he wants you to have, not the ones that you ask for. He chooses the miracles. And throughout the miracles among us, there are examples of that where somebody gets a different miracle than the one they've been asking for.
Yeah, and I am a big believer in that too, and I think, our creator knows the big picture better than we do, in the small little time that
Well,
we're on
by
Earth.
the way, to that point, Tanji, to that point, uh, in my book, there's a couple of stories where the miracle is given because God knows what the person's going to go on to do. Hannah prays for a child, right? And Hannah gets Samuel because God knows Samuel's going to go on to be a great prophet. Or Hezekiah doesn't want to have, King Hezekiah doesn't want to have a child because he knows that child's going to go on to become a very bad king like his father. So he prays to, he talks to Isaiah, who says, yeah, you're going to die of that boil. You're going to die of that boil. But when he prays to God, God cures him of the boil. And he goes on to marry Isaiah's daughter, and they birth another bad king. So God knows the prophecy, and he knows what he wants to happen, not a prophet.
Yeah, absolutely. The Old Testament, I've only in the recent years gotten into the Old Testament, and I'm Christian, not Jewish, so I just didn't study it. And I think all these years I've missed out because it is absolutely fascinating. The truth that runs through the whole thing from day one. It's a beautiful thing to see. I wanted to mention another story you share in the Miracles Among Us, and that's the one about Brett Baer's son. There were a series of miracles, born with a heart defect, the surgeries, they've been through a lot. And then most recently, um, it was a common cold that kind of evoked God's little God wink once again in their life, wasn't it?
You know, you can actually, in tracing this chapter, and Brett writes about this himself in a great book he wrote. But in
Yeah.
this chapter, you can see coursing through the whole chapter Paul's great courage. Brett's son is a very courageous person, and he wants to live a normal life, and he doesn't want to be the subject to all of this attention. But at the beginning, you know, Brett is a person of great detail, and Amy is a person of great love, and that combined to right at a big challenge to their marriage right at the beginning. And they came together with Brett asking a million questions and Amy showing her undying love for her young baby. And then great doctoring came in, and a National Children's Hospital in DC came in, and they saved this baby. But it's a complicated medical story because they couldn't put in his own tissue. They had to use donated tissue because of the kind of defect it was. And so they had to keep resizing it, which has led to these different operations. The last one, he thought he was out of the woods. He wouldn't have any more, but he had a cold, and some doctor, again, with intuition. So here's where faith drives you. The doctor's intuition caused him to do an x-ray, even though it was only
Yeah.
a cold. And he can't even really say why he did it, but he did it. And the x-ray showed a slight widening. And he thought, well, I don't think that's anything, but let me have the cardiologist see it. That kind of intuition is faith driven. And
Yeah.
then the cardiologist looks at the x-ray and says, this is a problem. Then they found another aneurysm, and they decided they had to operate again. The day before the operation, Brett's son, Paul, says to Brett, let's play golf, which was they play all the time. And son was on the golf team. And of course, Paul beats Brett in golf the day before this major surgery, and he's saved. But he's a great guy. He's 18 now.
And it's a wonderful story, and thank God for the doctor that thought, he listened to his intuition, to his gut, didn't he? Or there was an
But
angel on his shoulder telling him, "Pay
but that's
attention."
it. There's an angel on your shoulder. That's it.
Yeah,
That's it.
I really believe that. Do you think many in on all the doctors you work with, I wonder if many think like you do? I wonder if you've had an influence because you, like I say, this isn't your first book you've written that deals with these topics. Do you see this becoming more prevalent? Or more doctors buying, I say buying in, that's probably not the best way to put it, but accepting that maybe there's a huge power of prayer and recovery for their patients?
I think that my prior work and my TV appearances have worked for patients,
Mhm.
America's patients. America's patients believe me because I'm humble and I'm coming to them at their level. I don't talk down to patients. I try to talk a language that works for patients. And that's why I'm still on TV after all these years and on the radio and still writing books. But this book may reach doctors because it's a time of great bitterness in the medical profession and divisiveness and and at the same time we're trying to look more at prevention. Uh, you know, across the board. Why are we having an obesity epidemic in our children? Why are we having so much chronic illness? Can we take it a step back and go back to what we experienced before we ever get ill and stay healthy? What can we do to stay healthier? It's fine to take a pill that makes you better. It's even better to never need that pill. And
Exactly.
so I'm kind of talking to doctors here about a spiritual and a physical combination. Don't leave your faith at the door. Let your faith guide you. So for the first time, I think I'm talking more to doctors, not only to doctors.
Mhm.
Patients are going to love these stories, but doctors can be guided by them.
Well, it's nice to see that. There's a university health system. There's a large health system in Texas, based in San Antonio. And we recently interviewed a woman who heads up, they now have an integrative medicine department. So, and she talked about how they pray for their patients. I found that interesting. That even mainstream medicine, in some degree, even if it's not huge, it's something, right? It's a foot in the door.
We need to have a commonality between doctors and patients. So if you see that your doctor is praying, you're going to it's going to give you a level of confidence. They're at your level.
I agree. What would you advise patients in closing? You've been so generous with your time. What would you say to patients who are spiritual, who are Christian or Jewish, but believe in that God connection? What would you say to them if they're have concerns about their doctor not being aligned with that?
No, I don't think that's a problem either. I always had an adage, we need a surgeon who actually removes the thing, not one who can be our friend. So I don't totally believe that, but I wouldn't worry about it. I have a lot of stories in this book with doctors who say, I don't believe. And then I say, but is that a miracle? They go, yeah, yeah, that's a miracle. Well, what does that mean? So I'm not so concerned about whether the doctor believes. I'm more interested in whether the doctor is performs what becomes part of a miracle.
Yeah, I would agree. I agree. I hadn't looked at it like that. I have one more question, though. You led me to another thought. Have you ever come across any doctors who had no faith but had a miracle happen with a patient that changed their life?
Yeah, I end the book with that. It's a very funny story where Michael Baden, who is probably the top pathologist in the history of the world, he's phenomenal. He believes maybe, like Einstein did, in a greater presence out there somewhere, but he certainly doesn't believe in a personal God. And yet he was working in the morgue as a chief medical examiner, where a guy who the family was complaining the hospital had taken terrible care of this guy. But what happened next was even worse, which is in those days, they didn't use EKGs to check. And one morning they said, this guy has passed on. And they sent him to the morgue. And on the way, they heard noises. They didn't know what the noises were. He gets there, they put him in cold freeze. And when Biden sees him, he's moving. So he sends him back to the hospital. He says, this guy's not dead. He goes back to the hospital. And a few weeks later, the same exact thing happens again. They say he's not moving. They put a mirror up to him. He isn't breathing. They can't get a pulse. They go, he's gone. They send him to the hospital. Imagine what his family's doing. They get him to the hospital, and same thing exact happens. Baden sees him, and he says, he's alive. He sends him back again. So I said to Baden, how can you not believe in God with that kind of an irony going on? He says, never happened before, never happened again. But he refuses to look at it like God is telling a joke here, which I think is the obvious thing.
I think you're right. And you never know, maybe sometime later in his life, um, a little light bulb will go off and the transformation will occur. Who knows? Life's funny that
Well,
way.
he's a great guy anyway. He's a great guy, and I have a great line at the end of that chapter, which is Baden's voice is actually so soothing, more so than almost any doctor. He's the voice to usher you into the next world.
A peaceful transition, right? I love that. Well, I know, Dr. Siegel, your voice is certainly one we love hearing. You really are such a voice of reason. I'd love to have you back on and talk about what's going on in the medical community because as as the lack of harmony that exists in the medical community, I can assure you, and I know you know this, it's the same in the patient community as well. There's been a lot of trust eroded, I think, in the health institutions. So if you're willing, I'll reach back out to your team at some point, and we can talk about that if that's something you'd like to address.
Oh, you're a delight. I'm happy to come back on.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Well, I saw you this morning. I really enjoy your segments. Like I said, you're the voice of reason. I got through COVID listening to you and others who had common sense in the mix, and didn't just take the spoon-fed information. So I thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for saying that.
It's true.
Have
It's
a great
true.
day.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
You too, sir.
You too. Thanks. Great to be on with you, Tanji. Bye.
Likewise. Get social with us. Follow us on Instagram at Goodtaste TV.